Ole Miss will win 10 games in 2023. We'll tell you how. Plus, Damon Williams gets that golden ticket to the Elite 11 finals.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Subscribe there. We would appreciate it. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and let's get straight to it. Ole Miss is going to win 10 games in 2023. This football season, Ole Miss is going to win 10 games. Do you know why? Because I believe this middle of the field thing that I'm harping on, Jackson Dart will be able to correct, and he will have a monster season. 3,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, under 10 interceptions. That is the type of year that is coming for Jackson Dart. I just feel it for whatever reason. The strength of this team, with Quinshon, with the middle of the field, with Trey Harris on the outside. I still think Ole Miss needs a number one wide receiver, but that's not going to affect whether or not Ole Miss can win 10 games, in my opinion. I think Jackson is going to make the development necessary for the offense to be explosive. Okay? And I will say it again for people in the back that always say I have an agenda against Jackson, which I do not. I think Jackson Dart is going to throw for 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns this season. And this offense is going to be really, really explosive. Defensively, I love the additions from Pete Golding. I love what he did in the transfer portal so far. I think that against the run, Ole Miss is going to be a top 50 run defense. And in the SEC, whenever that happens, you're going to be into some games. If they are able to force some turnovers and get pressure on the passer, even if they give up some big pass plays from time to time, they're going to be able to be effective. And if you mix that with the offense, you have a nice formula for success for Ole Miss football. Now, let's bring up the schedule, okay? Because winning 10 games, everybody's going to assume that it means you lose to Alabama and you lose to Georgia. Here's the thing. I do not think that Ole Miss loses to both of those teams. I said it. I think Ole Miss wins in Tuscaloosa, even though they've done it twice in their history. I think Ole Miss wins in Tuscaloosa. If there's ever a year to get the Alabama Crimson Tide, it's this year where they lose both coordinators and have a quarterback, let's say, quandary. I do like Ty Simpson. I think Jalen Milroe provides a spark as well. But them getting the quarterback from Notre Dame to come down, Tommy Rees's quarterback up there, and he was a middle-of-the-pack quarterback as it is, that kind of tells me something. I think Ole Miss can get Alabama and LSU in September. And if you look at Ole Miss's schedule and take into account the fact that if they do that, if they pull that off, look at how the rest of the schedule lays out. They beat Alabama and LSU. Mercer, Tulane, Georgia Tech. That should be win-win-win. If they beat Alabama and LSU and go to 5-0, they get Arkansas and Oxford, which that should be a good situation for Ole Miss and Oxford. It's not Fayetteville. I take the Rebs all day in that game. I think this next game, this at Auburn Tigers game, this is going to be Auburn's Super Bowl. And we've seen in the history that Ole Miss has not performed well when it's the other team's Super Bowl. I talked to somebody today from Auburn that described that game as a Super Bowl-like atmosphere against Ole Miss because of what happened with Lane Kiffin and all of that during last season. There's been some bad blood developed between these two schools. But look after that. Vanderbilt at home. Texas A&M at home. At Georgia. I'm going to put a pin on there as an L, in my opinion. Georgia is just the elite of this conference, and in Sanford Stadium, this is going to be a problem. It's just going to be a problem. ULM, that's a W. Mississippi State, I've already discussed why I don't think very highly of what they're doing at the moment. So the schedule sets up really nicely for Ole Miss minus those two games. And if Ole Miss can get those two games, which I think they can, I think Ole Miss might be better than the Alabama Crimson Tide this year. More talented, better quarterback, better skill players, probably a worse defense, but in this age of college football, if you can score enough points, the defense doesn't really matter. And I'm kind of convinced at this moment that the end of the last season with Jaden Daniels was kind of the flash in the pan. That was the exception, not the first half of the season. And that's just because we have 3 years before that to where Jaden Daniels was that guy. I think he just went on a little bit of a heater towards the end of the season. Now, Texas A&M, by the time it's the end of the season, Bobby Petrino could have unleashed his coup on Jimbo Fisher and taken over. But if you look at that and you look at Georgia and you go into the ULM game after that into Mississippi State, you can see 10 wins on that schedule. Now, I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to necessarily win there, but if Ole Miss does the things that I talked about earlier in this segment, Ole Miss has a chance to win 10 games. They do. They're just better and more talented than they've ever been. And people follow football a certain ways, and you just look at it and it's like, okay, that one's going to be tough. We could probably slip up there. And you look for the warts on your team. But if you look at just absolutely talented, Ole Miss can get 10 of those games. And that's with a slip up. This is a talented football team. Number 1 running back in college football. Quarterback that just a 5-tool player. If he figures out the middle of the field portion, he has a chance to be unbelievably explosive, and this offense could look the way that Tennessee's did last year. Special teams, Caden Costa coming back. I have no worries about that. Ole Miss does need to punt the ball more effectively and perhaps more, honestly. There could be an argument that we're too talented to be going for it for as much as we are, as much as that is a momentum swing, but that's a conversation for another day. But I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs. And I'm not going to bore you with how I got there, but my balance is pretty messed up. My balance is messed up. And Bird Dogs, as a short, is just the most comfortable pair of shorts that I've put on, period. I walk morning, noon, and night every day because if I don't walk, I get wobbly. I've had half my balance got cut out during surgery. So I had to basically reuse the other side of my balance to kind of steady me through this process. But if you've worn the wrong shorts to a theme park, to the Grove, heck, just out for a walk, honestly, you know that walking in the wrong shorts is the worst thing you can do. And I will say this. I actually look forward to wearing my Bird Dog shorts to go out for my morning, noon, and night walks. Period. They are simply the most comfortable shorts I've ever put on. I'll put it like this. If you go out there and you try it, you will put a comment in there. It's like, yes, Stephen, you are right. These things are awesome. And it's just a really cool deal if you have these Bird Dog shorts. They're flexible fabric and also a liner on the inside. The shorts with their own underwear. It's pretty cool. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And when you enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dog style Yeti style tumbler with every order. All you have to do is put in promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That is LOCKEDONCollege, all one word. You will thank me later. All right, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, Tom Vanderford will come in and talk Ole Miss football as well. So that should be pretty cool for you. So I'm pretty fired up because Damon Williams, the quarterback commitment for the 2024 class, who came from Arizona to Elite 11 in Oxford, Mississippi. That is how much of an inroad he is making in Oxford, Mississippi. This should not be overstated. Got an invite, finally, to the Elite 11 finals. We talked about it with Brian Smith when we had him. We talked about him overall that he was on the wait list to see if an invite needed to be given on the border. he got his invite. Now he gets to go out to California and run all the drills, and you'll see with Brian Smith in the next segment, the Elite 11 is a good experience for high school players. So I'm very excited for Damon and his family to go out there and do that. It should be a lot of fun. Now, Damon Williams, quarterback out of Basha, Arizona, unbelievable quarterback, and his strength is actually playing football. It's not necessarily a camp environment. So whenever he performed at the Elite 11 in Oxford, it was not a situation where it was at his best. He told me in an interview his role models, if you will, are Bryce Young and Kyler Murray. And Kyler Murray makes sense because, like I said, he's right outside Phoenix to begin with. But he's a really good quarterback, and he can absolutely spin it at a very high level. He told me, that he's been watching Bryce Young and what to do in the passing game and how he handles stuff. The number one pick in the draft, that makes sense as well, because height-wise, they kind of match up. Damon Williams was a quarterback that beat Dylan Raiola, the number one player in the country and Georgia commit, twice last season. He makes plays. You can see him on this video. Everything goes on that he makes plays, and that is so important for the quarterback position. Just absolutely so important. And, he kind of gets away with some stuff because of his mobility, but it is high school football. He does have the tools to be hyper successful, especially in the Lane Kiffin offense. He might be a Bryce Young type player, but think Tua. Tua was recruited by Lane Kiffin to Alabama, and he revolutionized that offense. They built up the talent around him, and he became something very, very special that, you just can't overstate from time to time. I'm going to tell you right now, I am so excited for Damon Williams Jr. to come to Ole Miss, and I think the quarterback room next year, the starting quarterback will be Walker Howard. He will be the guy that is getting the hype going into the season. He will be backed up by Damon Williams. I do think Jackson Dart, like I said earlier in the show, is going to throw for 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns and declare for the NFL draft. I think that is the type of year that I am expecting from Jackson. I know he can do it. I've shown him where the holes were. And I mean, obviously don't listen to me, but you know where the holes are. You know what you need to work on. If I know it, you know it. And you can kind of go from there. Really cool stuff. I'm really excited to see exactly what lies with Jackson Dart in this season, the defense in this season, the skill players in this season, the offense and defensive line. All of that I'm really fired up about. I think Lane Kiffin has put together a team that he can win with. I know that 2024 is hyper important, and a lot of these players are going to be gone for the 2024 season. I think this team has a chance to be pretty good this year. Now, it falls on Jackson's shoulders. It falls on the defense's shoulders. But if they come out and the defense is just serviceable and Jackson Dart fixes that one little hole in his game, you have a chance for an extremely explosive offense with a defense that's serviceable that honestly it doesn't have to be. It's almost like padding for Ole Miss football. That goes in, but if you look at the 2024 season, Damon Williams will become a major piece in the Ole Miss football program. The battle between Damon Williams and Walker Howard is going to be one for the ages. I know everybody's like, no, not another quarterback competition. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Not saying that Walker Howard's not a good player. He's a generational type talent. But competition is going to happen every spring. And they're going to play it up that way. And they're going to play it up to the kids that way. Because the kids need to believe what's going on for it to be effective. And because of that, they're going to be better players. And once they're better players, you can turn them loose in the SEC. And all of a sudden, games are a little bit easier than even practice. I love Walker Howard as a player. Unbelievable. I am really excited for Damon Williams as well. And I think that when Damon Williams and Walker Howard are in full control of this quarterback room, maybe year 2, this could be the most talented quarterback room in Ole Miss history, including this year with Jackson Dart, Spencer Sanders, and Walker Howard. I'm very fired up. It could happen. But I've told you why I think Ole Miss will win 10 games this year, how it will happen. The schedule's not as hard as you want it to believe it is. It's just at Georgia and at Alabama. Other than that, it's in the SEC West schedule with non-conference games that aren't that difficult. And you look at the 24-24 class, Damon Williams in the Elite 11, and we're about to talk to Brian Smith about Cameron Beavers, Caleb Odom, those guys in recruiting as well, because there's a chance that this recruiting class has a chance to really take off. We're about to enter camp season, and that's an important time for high school recruiting and bringing people to your campus. You're seeing official visits lining up. Dylan Hipp, who's from Arizona, see Damon Williams, is visiting the 2nd of June. And he's a tight end. Caleb Odom, they're offering to make him a jumbo wide receiver, which, as you'll hear from Brian Smith, when it comes to wide receivers that are huge, Ole Miss has a pretty good track record. And we'll see exactly what happens. Really, really fired up. Brian Smith coming up next. Stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to that YouTube channel. Hit the bell for notifications, upvote, comment, all of that stuff. We are here with Brian Smith, the resident expert on all things recruiting in the Locked On Network. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on inside the state of Mississippi. Normally you see him on Saturday mornings. We're going to change it up a little bit. He's going to be a Thursday gift for everybody this week. Just because our normal baseball guy who does our weekend preview, he's gone. So obviously Ole Miss did not make Hoover. But how you doing, Brian?
Doing well, sir. How about yourself?
Pretty good. We talked about Damon Williams and how he was waitlisted after the Oxford Elite 11. He did get the call to go to the Elite 11 finals. I think it's well-deserving. I'm pretty fired up to see what he could do out there with Dylan Raiola and all those guys.
That's cool for him, man, because I've been out to the finals before, and it's one of those deals where a lot of the kids, especially like in the Deep South, going to L.A., competing against everybody, they'll have former Elite 11 winners there, guys that have been drafted, just walking around talking to them. I mean, that's a great experience. So it's going to help him grow on and off the gridiron. Last year, I was just chatting it up with Bryce Young, just the random guy hanging out at a football field at Elite 11 because he'd been at that before. So good for him. And I'm kind of curious to see how he does, especially with the accuracy challenge, because they have really unique ways to look at the distance, the order they throw. All of that can help us measure how good a kid is now, as well as what we can think of they're going to do long term. So good for him, and I'm curious to see what he does.
Yeah, and one of the players that he is recruiting heavily to Ole Miss is Caleb Odom. And for a while now, people have wondered, would he be the next commitment? And now I do realize that we're about to enter camp season, so there's probably going to be some in-state guys that are going to be the next commitment. But Caleb Odom has to be. I think he's high on that list, isn't he, Brian?
From what I've heard, Ole Miss and Miami are the most likely landing spots, but he's going to take visits. Miami will be one of them. I think we'll have clarity on him by no later than about the 15th of July. It could be even in the month of June. The key that I heard, for whatever it's worth, is Ole Miss is giving him a shot to just flat out play receiver. Mm-hmm. He's 215 already. Great kid, by the way. He's one of the better interviews I've done this year. And man, does he have a wingspan. Think about the recent history. Name a school that's got more history in the last, say, 5 to 8 years with big receivers than Ole Miss going to the NFL. It's not a hard selling point if you're Lane Kiffin in the Ole Miss Rebels, I wouldn't think. And, he's from just outside of Atlanta. He's familiar with SEC territory. And Caleb, great kid. I think he would do well if he ended up with the Rebels. So I'd be kind of curious to see what Kiffin would do with him with all his play calling abilities.
Yeah, because Jonathan Mingo just went in the second round this year, and he's over 220 pounds. So you're absolutely correct. As far as big receivers, Ole Miss definitely has a type at that position. Really.
They do.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit now to the defensive line in the state of Mississippi. So we'll start with the Cameron Beavers commitment. And Ole Miss has committed him. They've committed Jeffrey Rush. That's two of what I call the big four in defensive linemen in the state of Mississippi. What do you think about Cameron Beavers, and what's your impression?
He's bigger than I thought, at least based on what the listing is. I always like to do what I just personally call the look at it yourself, or the eye test, however you want to say it. And his get off on film is what you're looking for. It screams SEC West. That's probably the easiest way. If you can play D-line, especially interior D-line in the SEC West, Auburn, Ole Miss, LSU, etc., you're a dude. And I don't think there would be any problem for him playing for any school, Alabama, A&M, doesn't matter. And I think he could play early. Really strong, but his first step just screams athlete. Forget football. He's a kid to be good in track. He could be good in baseball, whatever he wanted to do. If they can get him and maybe somebody like Beavers or somebody like that to go along with him, you're talking about changing your program. We all know that Lane is going to find a way to score. If you haven't figured that out yet, and no matter what school you root for, you're probably not very good at understanding the game of football. Lane Kiffin is as good a play caller as there is in college ball. They have to stop more guys. You need talent to do that on defense. And this kid can play for anybody, man. This matters too because it's an in-state kid. They've got to do better at getting the in-state kids to stay home. This is a key player.
Yeah, there's two observations that I have on Cameron Beavers. First of all, the coach, whoever it is at Bay Springs, has figured out if you slant him, there's no offensive lineman in the state that can block him.
They get it every play.
Yeah, every play they slant that guy one way or that, and there's no chance that he is being blocked. Yep. And the second thing is this is different than the 2019 class for Ole Miss, and that class is pretty legendary amongst Ole Miss fans because N'Kobe Dean went to Georgia, Derek Hall went to Auburn, Brian Young went to Alabama. All these top defensive prospects, they just seem to leak out of state. This is a situation with Jeffrey Rush and Cameron Beavers of Ole Miss kind of putting a flag in the ground and saying, this isn't happening again. We know this is a special class, and we are going to do what we can to make this a successful class for us.
I think there's 2 points to what you just said, and you're 100% correct. If you're ever going to consistently compete at the very top echelon of college football, which means basically the SEC, you can't lose your in-state kids, nor can you lose them to the guys that you're trying to beat that always have more talent than you. That's not going to end well. So could you imagine what Ole Miss defenses would have looked like with N'Kobe Dean? I mean, he was unbelievable. He was from Mississippi, and he was the best linebacker in the country, and they couldn't keep him home. So if you look at it now, they've got these 4 D linemen. We all know who they are. If they could even get 3 of them, it changes your program completely. And then it'll also make it easier to get more linebackers. Like the next N'Kobe Dean that comes out of Mississippi, and it probably won't be long, because for those of you that don't know, Mississippi per capita puts about as many guys in the NFL as any state in the United States of America.
And they already have Terry and Perkins coming.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt either.
Yeah.
I mean, like Perkins, I think is just athlete. I think he could play about 5 spots. What a freak that kid is. Mm-hmm. But that also helps you get the next corner, and it also helps you get the next free safety. People want to play with other dudes. So getting these kids not only to get in your class, but getting them early will help Kiffin and everybody on the Ole Miss staff and some of the other guys too.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, but do you know about anything about Fat Clark from Winona? Linebacker?
I mean, I know the name, but yeah. I don't know him, like his recruitment or anything like that.
This is just an example of Mississippi, to where there's a low-level 3-star that is late to get into recruiting because Mississippi is not an over-recruited state. It's still there. So you can still surprise people. And he was a low-level 3-star, went up as in the top 10 at the Elite 11 because they do the all positions thing now. He made that. He's 235 pounds. He's built like a prototypical like Alabama-style linebackers that you think of. And this kid just started out like it's just an afterthought, and he's going to blow up and eventually be a 4-star by the time this recruiting season ends.
I have a running joke with a few of my buddies in the recruiting industry about different states, what we can expect and all that. But the one state that we all agree on that we don't know diddly about is Mississippi. And it's because of what you just said. The state is just, from a land perspective, is massive. There's one kid in every town. It's the biggest pain in the butt in the country to recruit because, like, I live in Florida, you live in Florida. The coach is flying here into about 3 or 4 cities, and they can hit every high school they need to, by and large, really quick. There's no good way to recruit Mississippi. So a kid like that, you just have to go around to all the schools. There's no efficient way to do it. It's unfortunate for some of the guys that get overlooked, but that's why some kid can go to Ole Miss or Southern Miss and be a low-level 3-star, whatever. And then after 2 years, you're like, wow, we know this kid's only going to be here 3 years because he's a dude. But he played at a 1A high school in Mississippi. It's one of the most cool things about recruiting in the South, these small high schools that have kids like that, or even a decent-sized school, but it's not overly recruited. You never know, man. It's amazing the talent that Mississippi puts out.
Yeah, if let's say that 2019 went differently, and you did get Nakobe Dean, and you did get Derek Hall, and you did get Brian Young, the kids that Ole Miss got in that class, in that Mississippi class, got them to a Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, they might have won. They might have been in the playoff.
Yeah,
legitimately, it changes.
That's how close it was. Yeah,
the difference between Georgia and I'll use them as the obvious because they've won it the last 2 years. You can go to like Pro Football Focus and look up snap counts. Okay, when people say, "Well, what the hell difference does that make?" Some of the guys that are getting drafted for Georgia aren't even playing 400 snaps in a season. And it's because the guy behind them is going to get drafted too. He would start for 98% of the schools in the country, but Kirby can just rotate the guys. You need as many as you can, especially on defense because you're chasing the ball, to just rotate. That's it. It's not a rocket science adventure. When your guy's playing 450 snaps in the regular season and you go to the playoffs, look at what happened to TCU. A lot of their guys played too much. That did not end well for them. I think Georgia just scored again.
Yeah,
so,
right.
You know what I mean? Ole Miss has run into that on D. Like if you look at them at the end of the year, sometimes they're out of gas. They need more guys like that, especially on D. So once they get into a shootout with Alabama, they've got one more pass rusher, one more DB, whatever it is, and hopefully all of the above to make that big play.
Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers tune in tomorrow on the show, and we're going to have Kara or Tom. I don't know which one, but they'll be on at certain points during the week. I think it'll be Tom tomorrow, but tune in for that. Thank you, Brian, very much for joining us today. And, man, I just like talking to you about all this, and I look forward to talking to you next week, man.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.